Well, I've already greeted you once, so I probably shouldn't greet you again, but I will. Welcome back. Probably for many of us that's not quite literally true, but in another sense it might be kind of true of all of us. Welcome back from summer. Now we can argue, and it's a legitimate argument to some extent, that fall, this sort of social, cultural season of fall, only begins after Labor Day, but in truth, I think for most of us, Labor Day weekend does mark the beginning of something new. It's time for us to at least prepare ourselves to shift gears from summer relaxation and a little bit reluctantly perhaps to turn back to some of the realities and challenges of life that we give ourselves permission to just kind of a little bit forget about during the warm summer month. Not all of them, but at least some of them. And even though the calendar tells us that fall will not happen until September 21st-ish, in truth, it's this weekend that marks the beginning of the transition from summer to fall. But that's not the only change that comes with these days, because the ordinary routine of this fall, this Labor Day season, we'll call it, will be disrupted later this week by our children returning to school. Not that that is itself a disruption, it happens every year after all, but as you know, if you are a parent or a teacher, or even if you are just reading or listening to the news, returning to school is going to be a lot different than it has ever been in the past. Maybe your family or someone in your family has chosen online learning. Maybe your children or the children of someone in your family are returning physically to school. We don't know exactly how either of those will go, and so with that comes uncertainty, and often along with uncertainty comes anxiety, worry, perhaps even fear. So you might very well be experiencing this Labor Day weekend differently than most years. That being said, however it is you're experiencing this season, this Labor Day weekend this year, however different that experience might be, what has not changed, to get a little bit philosophical for a moment, what has not changed is that you yourself are the one who is experiencing it. These days, it seems that change is often the only constant in our lives, but however much change happens around us, we would say, we are still ourselves. You are still you, right? But who are you? Well, today we're starting a new series for a new season, and it's all about you and who you think you are. Which, by the way, are not necessarily or always exactly the same thing. You and who you think you are, though, has huge, massive implications for your life today and your life in the future, and the quality of that life. So it's very, very important. And there are a lot of reasons why it's so important, and we're going to be looking at quite a few of them over the course of this series. But to begin this week, let's just look at 3 reasons why who you think you are is so important. Who you think you are, your identity as you understand it, why it is so important. 3 reasons. First, your sense of identity, your sense of who you are matters because it will drive your actions, what you do and how you do it. For example, if you derive your sense of identity from your work, then you're going to pour yourself into your work. You will pour yourself into your work. You'll work evenings, you'll work weekends, you'll work holiday weekends, so you're probably not here. And in the end, without much doubt, you will, at the very least, irritate your spouse and your family. If you get your sense of identity from your kids and your role as a parent, if being a mom or a dad, for that matter, is all and everything to you, then you will pour all your time and energy into that, into your kids. Your kids will be your world. It's going to determine your actions, what you do. If your friends and who are your friends is what determines your identity, your understanding of yourself. This often happens to us in our youth. Your time, your energy, your decisions and choices will be driven by them and what they think, or very often what you think they will think or might think, will determine your actions. If you get your sense of identity from being a member of a political party or perhaps a community or a social group of some kind, your calendar isn't entirely your own. There are certain events and activities that just need to happen, and they're going to happen, and they're going to appear on your calendar whether or not they happen at the most convenient time for you in your life. They will determine at least some of your actions. So your sense of identity, your sense of who you are, is important because it will drive your actions. And I've just identified a few different ways where we can get that sense of who we are. It will drive our actions, and that is important. How you define your identity, how you understand yourself, and who you understand yourself to be has huge implications in life for another reason. It will drive your actions, yes, but it will also determine, in very large measure, the health of your relationships. People in healthy relationships, we should perhaps say healthy people in healthy relationships, know who they are and have a clear sense of that, a clear sense of identity. And so, healthy friendships and even romances can form and be sustained when two people each have a clear sense of who they are and then can give who they are, that can give that identity to each other freely. People who know who they are and have a firm sense of that are, simply put, more attractive and fun to be with. Take some counterexamples when that virtue is not present. Many marriages fail because one or the other partner does not know who he or she is apart from being part of that couple, and so too much pressure is put on that relationship. Similarly, the relationship between a parent and a child can break down when the parent tries to be a peer, a pal, and the child becomes the authority in the relationship or the decision maker. Fast friendships can fall apart when one party becomes needy and annoying because they're uncertain of who they are and they need that relationship to reassure them. Sometimes that kind of a person, in an effort to strengthen or save a friendship on which they depend for their sense of self, that kind of person can actually drive their friends further away. So your sense of identity drives your actions. It determines the health of your relationships, at least very significantly so. And at third, it will also decide what you value. And that is fundamental to the course of our life. What is it that you value? Whatever defines you is ultimately where you find value and meaning for your life. You value what you think makes you, you. For many people, it can be their ethnicity. Here in Brantford, some of us might consider ourselves to be Italian, some of us might see ourselves as Filipino, or like my family and many others, going way back in time, we might think of ourselves as Irish or English, whatever it might be. I was born and raised thinking that I was Irish. My family had been in Canada for 150 years. I was Canadian. But our identity was as Irish, and those things determine what you value. It might be ethnicity, it might be where you live, your neighborhood. For lots of people, it's their school, where they went to school, their alma mater. These things determine what you value. Many people look to what they own to try to get their sense of self, their sense of identity. The car they drive, the style of clothes that they wear, where they go on vacation, sometimes whether they go on vacation, or at least if they go out of town. They look to these things to tell them who they are, and that's what they put value on. Others look to their title or their role in life. I'm a doctor, I'm a lawyer, I'm a pastor, I'm somebody in charge of something. At least I'm in charge of something that's bigger than the person across the street. And so that's what I value when I encounter and relate to people and in my own life. Many people, perhaps more than you might think, define themselves by their hobbies or their interests. I saw a bumper sticker the other day that said, "Old gardeners never die, they just spade away." Gardeners are gardeners. Dog lovers, there's a classic. Dog lovers are dog lovers. Homeschoolers are homeschoolers. And Toronto Maple Leaf fans are disappointed, mostly. I think it's fair to say. And then sadly, there are also people who are defined by what has happened to them, like refugees of war or victims of violent crime. Those things can define you. There are also, though, more happily, people who are defined by what they've endured or accomplished because of what happened to them, like cancer survivors or those in recovery from addictions. We admire those people and their accomplishments. Any or all of these examples that I've set out in front of you are possible places that we can look, and many of us do look there, to begin to understand our identity. But the key word there is to begin. Because all of the ones that I've set out, good, bad, or otherwise, are incomplete. None of them represents the fullness of identity for any of us. And many of them, this is the irony, many of them are passing away, even as we make an investment in them. They're based on something that's at best temporary. This obviously is a big topic: identity, sense of self, and where we can find it. And we're going to look at it over the course of a number of weeks. But to begin with this week, let's put the whole passage on a solid scriptural base, what God has to say about it all. And to do that, we're going to look at a passage from the Bible that we heard proclaimed, at least in part, today. It's from a book of the Bible called Ezekiel. Now, Ezekiel was a prophet who lived about 600 years before Jesus. He lived at a time when the holy city of Jerusalem was in big trouble. It was actually coming apart. It was falling apart. The people at that time had pretty much abandoned God, and the whole culture had become very corrupt. And remember, their identity was they were God's people. They had abandoned that identity, though, and meanwhile, a nearby powerful neighbor, the nation of Babylon, was amassing arms and men, preparing to march and destroy the nation of Judah and the Jewish culture itself. What is being called into question at the time Isaiah wrote the words that we heard today, what is being called into question is the very idea of the nation, the idea of the people themselves, and who they really are. That's Israel at the time of the prophet Ezekiel. Now, as you read the book of Ezekiel, if you've read the book of Ezekiel, you'll note that he receives message after message from the Lord. That was what makes him a prophet, after all. The Lord speaks to the prophet, and then the prophet's responsibility is in turn to speak to the people. He receives message after message from the Lord. And at one point, God tells him this, and we heard this today. So you, O Son of Man, God says, you I have made a watchman for the house of Israel. Whenever you hear a word from my mouth, you shall give them warning from me. Warn the wicked person to turn from their ways. Now, we hear the word watchman and we think in terms of a metaphor. But in ancient times, it was a real practical reality. It was a job. It was an important office in the city. Cities were walled for their own defense, and watchmen were stationed on the city walls to serve as the eyes of the city, especially to warn of approaching danger. But here the danger Ezekiel is to be on the lookout for is not a foreign invader or an outside force. Remember that last line. Warn the wicked person to turn from their ways. Ezekiel is a watchman for the dangers of sin and evil in the hearts of the people of Israel. Those are dangers that diminish and even destroy the people. He goes on, the Lord says to Ezekiel, say to them, as I live, declares the Lord God, I have no pleasure in the death of the wicked, but that the wicked turn from their ways and live. I will save them from all the apostasies into which they have fallen, and I will cleanse them. Then they will be my people, and I will be their God. They will be my people, and I will be their God. God tells Ezekiel, I'm going to tell you who you are, and I'm going to use you to tell everybody else. And it's really quite simple. You are mine. I choose you. Now, we've all had the disappointment of the opposite situation, the disappointment of not being chosen, the disappointment of not being picked. Perhaps it's as a child. We remember the pain of being chosen when we're choosing up sides for some game of some kind, being chosen last, or maybe even not being chosen at all. Or the memory may be something fresher, the memory of not being chosen for a particular job or situation where you just know that you could have done a great job, but you were not the one who was chosen. You were rejected, you feel. Most of us have a memory, or perhaps several, like that. Very often, as I mentioned, it can be something that happened long ago. But no matter how long ago it happened, and no matter how inconsequential the original circumstance might have been, childhood games are not necessarily all that important in the grand scheme of things. No matter how long ago it happened, no matter how inconsequential it might have been, you still remember. Because it still hurts a little. You remember that feeling. We know what it feels like not to be chosen. On the other hand, we also, please God, know the joy of being chosen, to be on the team, to be maybe even the captain or leader of a team, to go on a date, or for that promotion at work. This time you actually get it. Or a spouse who says, I choose you. We know the joy of that. So, being a little bit aware of both the joys and the sorrows of being chosen or not being chosen, I'm going to share with you and give to you a little bit of homework for the coming week. Pretty simple, really simple, in fact. I want you to find some quiet time during the week and use it, let's say, as prayer time, to put yourself in the presence of God. Just quiet time, no noise, no distractions. Doesn't have to be that long. Take that time, and during that time, just reflect on this. God chose you. God chose you. God chose to conceive the very idea of you from back before there was anything, before the Big Bang, because God is eternal. From all eternity, he was thinking of you. And in time and at the proper time, he put you together. He knit you together in your mother's womb, as Scripture puts it. He gave you breath and life and a name. He chose your parents. He gave you the ones he wanted you to have, exactly the ones, indeed, that would make sure that you would one day arrive on the scene, because you are part of his plan. He chose your gifts and your talents and your abilities. He chose your strengths and your weaknesses. Most importantly, he chose you to be part of his family. A family with a plan and a purpose for the whole of your life, as well as an eternal destiny. His plan for you goes beyond your physical death. All of this gives us good reason to believe that basing our identity, our sense of self, on God and who he says we are makes a lot of sense, provides a solid foundation. You don't need a bumper sticker on your car to know who you are. At the core of the you that is you is the choice that the Almighty Maker of everything has chosen. The core of your identity is not to be found in your pain and suffering, real though they are. The core of your identity is not your suffering. It's the pain and suffering that Jesus suffered for you on the cross. You are not what has been done to you or what's happened to you. You're all about what has been done for you by Christ. It's not even about your mistakes, your missteps, and your bad choices, and we all have those, and sometimes we go over and over them. It's not about that. It's about his choice. And he chooses you.